Howdy, I'm Scott from Chernobyl Audio, and I'm going to help you get started using the new Laney Digbeth bass plugin. Let's jump right in with the installation process. Well, I already have the plugin installed, but I want to just show you a couple things. When you are doing this installation, click Next here, and there's going to be a screen where you want to do a complete installation or a custom installation. I would recommend that you do a custom installation, and I'll show you why. So let's pretend that this says custom, and I'm going to click that. I'm going to click Next for now. The reason why I want to do a custom installation is because you can actually choose what you want to install. Now, if you do not use Pro Tools, there's no reason to install the Pro Tools AAX plugin format. You don't need it, you can't use it. So you don't need to install it. You can click this little arrow here and then choose entire feature will be unavailable. That way it's not going to take up extra hard drive space, even though it is a small amount. You just don't need it, so you don't need to install it. Next, if you are not a bass player and you don't plan on recording a bass live through your interface or anything like this, or practicing a bass, you actually don't need to install the standalone version either. So you can make sure that feature is unavailable, meaning that you're only going to be installing the VST3 64-bit plugin. This is really cool to do because it helps keep your file and storage organized, and you only install what you're actually going to use or what you actually need. From here, you can just finish the installation as normal and then open up your DAW. Here we are. I'm using Cubase, but a lot of this is really DAW agnostic. It doesn't really matter. The first thing that you really want to do is you want to make sure that the plugin has been installed successfully. Now in Cubase, I can go to Studio and VST Plugin Manager, which will bring up this little window, and I can actually search all of the installed plugins and instruments right here inside Cubase. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the VST Effects tab here, and I'm going to type in Digbeth. There it is. I can see that it has been successfully installed. Cubase can recognize it, which means I can begin to use it inside of the DAW. Now there's two ways that you can use this plugin. You can use it with a real bass DI, something that's being performed by a bassist that has been delivered to you, or you can use it with a bass sample library, something like Submission Audio or from Solemn Tones. I'll show you both ways right now. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to record a bass. So I'm going to add a track here. There we go. I'll just call it real bass, just to differentiate it, okay? All that we would need to do here is right over here in my inserts panel, I just click in my search bar, I can type dig. Here comes Digbeth, and that's literally it. Because it's reading an audio file and it's on an audio track, it's already going to begin working. So from here, you could create your tone or do whatever you want to do, so on and so forth. The second way, which is how we're going to use it here in this demonstration video, is with a sample bass library. So first off, you're going to need to have a sampled bass library that will generate a DI for you. So in this case, I am using Bass 3 from Submission Audio. And if I just click here, we can hear that we have a DI signal. This is exactly what we need. It's going to work perfect. From there, you would program the MIDI, which I've done. And then if I press play, we will be hearing all the MIDI. There we go. Now we have a MIDI track. And from there, we can start using the Digbeth plugin. I'll disable this stuff. I'll talk about that later. But let's go ahead and get started with the Digbeth itself. Let's look at the plugin here, go over the various screens so you can understand the process here. Because what I really want to do is I want to show you a good workflow process that you can go through that's efficient and quick, so you can spend more time developing tones, not really trying to figure out what everything is here, okay? Let's just start with the main page. This is going to be the page that you see when you first load the plugin. Look at the top. So up here, we have some information about the plugin, about a manual. You click those, the relative pages will appear. We have an input signal here, okay, with a general overview of how loud the input signal is. This can be controlled with this input down here. The input and gate. This will be very important if you're playing bass for real into the DAW and you really want to make sure that your bass is clean, so it's gating when nothing is being played, okay? Right above that here is save and delete, which is for the preset menu. Just opposite the preset menu are undo, redo, license information, and mono and stereo. This will be really good if you have a mono or stereo track. So if you're using this on a bus, for example, like I am, and you want to do stereo effects, it might be a good idea to have the plugin in stereo. Typically, bass is mono, so you're going to be using mono effects, but the option is there if you need it. Further, we have a MIDI functionality learn tool. So if you're using a keyboard or a MIDI foot switch while you're playing bass for real, if you click this, you can see all the options you have to MIDI learn your foot switch, so you can control, for example, a different preset right with your feet or with a MIDI keyboard. Very cool, definitely advanced feature. You probably won't need this, but if you do need it, here it is. Obviously, then we have a tuner, self-explanatory. We can reset the entire plugin with this button right here, pretty cool. And then we have some output features here, which can kind of dull the bass a little bit. Not totally mute it like on a fader and a DAW, but it'll just turn the volume down. So you have some control over that. Down below now is our processing chain. And in this case, you can see we have a 2-lane processing chain. In other words, we have the input, which is denoted by this graphic here. You see the circle with the line coming into it. It breaks off to the top part of the processing chain, which will be your high frequencies, and the low part, which will be your low frequencies. Both of these frequencies are processed independently, okay? And then they come back together for the output. We will go through this, okay? So don't worry. The first thing that I would honestly recommend that you do is you start going through all the presets. This will give you a great idea of all the different sounds and possibilities that are with this plugin. And also it gives you a chance to see how all the different elements of the plugin can be used to create this sound. Now, I mentioned a 2-way processing just a couple seconds ago of otherwise known as the split bass processing method. So if you don't know what that is, you can just see what's a 1-way starting point. And you can see here that it's just the bass is processed as a whole. The entire signal is processed as a whole, as opposed to a 2-way starting point where the bass is processed in an upper and lower frequency section. Let's talk about all the different sections of the plugin, and then we will start developing a tone. This is the input section. Everything you do here is affecting the clean DI. You're not creating a bass tone here. You're just shaping the DI before it passes through the rest of the processing. This is the pedals page. Pretty self-explanatory. You have basically like an octaver style pedal. You have a compressor pedal. You have one type of distortion and then a second type of distortion. One is more extreme than the other. Obviously the gamma burst, kind of the extreme one. Then you have the amp page, which we've already seen. We have the cab page where we can select a couple of different cabinets and also a different microphone. We can also load our own IR if we wish, and then darken or brighten the overall sound of the cabinet a little bit to help it fit into a mix. Further, we have the effects page. We have an API style EQ. We have the Sonic BBE style Sonic Maximizer processor. And then we have the good old 1176 style compressor and an LA2A style compressor. Basically, everything that you would need here to get a really nice bass sound that's detailed, compressed nicely, and fat. Now, on the bottom half of things, we kind of have the same thing, except we have two different modules here. This module is all about compressing the low end of the signal wherever a crossover point is. On top of that, we can also sidechain the low end of the bass. We'll talk about this. We also have a cab page, which I would highly recommend that you do not use if you're going to use the 2-way processing method, because you don't want the low end to be distorted. This actually causes it to be less defined and less punchy. We have the same effects page here that can be used to great effect to really contain the low end, to keep it pinned in the spot that you want it to be. And then we have a little special module, which I opted not to use this time, where you can add some more harmonics to the low end of the bass to really make it punchy and also be heard on smaller speakers. Now, both of these chains will go into the output section of the plugin, which is where you can do EQ. You can change the balance, which is awesome, of the bass and the treble. That means you can change how much the bass tone will sway to the treble side of things or the bass side of things. You have a limiter, and you have a pretty decent EQ parametric here that you can work with. If you double click, you can add nodes. You can change the type of EQ cut or boost that you're doing. So you have low cut, low shelf, bells, and you can do quite a bit of extensive EQ right here, which is quite nice because then it's part of the preset that you save, and you wouldn't necessarily have to do any post-processing after the fact. Finally, you have the limiter, which will help keep the bass contained so there's no errant peaks, and it'll just pin it where you want it to be. It's all contained, no clipping, very nice. So this entire plugin suite is everything that you would want to use to craft a bass guitar tone, especially for metal, okay? So the example we're going to do here is a doom metal type of song, and we want, or I should say I wanted to create a thick, somewhat grindy bass guitar, but not a glassy sounding bass guitar. And so I will walk you through how I created this preset here that I'm using for this song. Now, just to give you an idea of what this can sound like, let's have a listen. Sounds great. A nice thick bass tone that still cuts through the mix with a little bit of chainsaw grindy action. All right, so let's discuss how to create something like this. So I'll actually turn all these modules off so we can go one at a time, show you how to do everything. So the very first thing that you want to do is you want to set your crossover point. Now the crossover point is indicated by this red line right here. And this is going to basically split the bass frequencies. What you're looking to do here is separate the most amount of low end from the high end so that you can process them separately. This allows you to contain the low end, compress it, get it pinned so that it's nice and consistent and not moving around or making the mix kind of feel out of place where the low end dumps out of the mix and then comes back and then it's too loud. So the split bass method here is pretty much a standard when it comes to mixing metal, because you can identify and process different aspects of the bass tone independently. So there's a lot more control. Now the point of all that is to set the crossover so that you have as many low frequencies as possible separated from the high frequencies. Let me show you what this sounds like. Now you can see on the graph here what it's doing. Now listen, as I move this crossover point higher, you're going to start hearing more of the mid-range of the bass being included into the low end, and that's generally not what you want, all right? A good starting point is going to be around 200 hertz. And in the Digbeth plugin, if you hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and you click on something, it'll set it to the default position that Aurora has put, in the plugin. So if this was originally at 900, all I have to do is hit Alt or Option, click, and it goes back to the default setting. 200 is generally a good starting point of splitting the low end from the high end. Now you can hear that there's just a lot of low end there. Now if you're having trouble discerning how much low end you have, you can click the S button here for solo. Let's go ahead and solo the low end. Now you can hear more of the lower mids coming in. And this is really not what we want. We want to set the crossover to where it's basically only the low end frequencies. So around 200 hertz. In this case, it looks to be 221, but I set this completely by ear. I was just waiting for the point where the low mid started to come into the crossover point, and then I moved it back a little bit. That's all. All right. Now, if you look here, there are 3 types of crossover points. This basically controls how much of either signal will blend into each other at the crossover point. So type A is a very brick wall. Here's the low end, here's the high end. B, a bit of each will bleed into each other. And then C is like the most amount of bleed of each frequency range into each other. Just make sure that you have unsoloed the low end so you can actually hear the difference. You can actually see it in the graph here and hear how much more of the low end and how much softer that crossover point is becoming. It's a little bit more exaggerated when there's a cab and an amp. Let me go ahead and do that. And let's turn the pedal on as well. All right, let's go back to A. Now listen. You see, so the crossover is not just a whoop, stark split, and the 2 frequencies are like independent from each other. If you want them to bleed a little bit, you can choose a different crossover point. I preferably like crossover point A because it's just, I want the separation, all right? Now the low cut and the high cut, remember this is affecting the DI before it goes into the processing. You can clean up the DI a little bit here. So you can cut off the super low sub lows here at like 20 hertz. And because a lot of bass guitars don't have a lot of information really above 7 or 8,000 kilohertz, I tend to bring this down to like 10 just to, clean up the bass DI so that this information really isn't going to be processed through the chain at all. And from this point, we can go to the upper frequency range so we can craft our distortion type sound. Now that we have the bass DI shaped and the crossover point, let's go ahead and start crafting the upper frequency sounds. The first thing that I think is really important to do is to select which cabinet you want to run through. Now you need to have some distortion here so you can actually hear the differences, right? Because a DI is just going to sound like a DI. So I'm going to enable my pedal and amp processing and then also my cabinet page. I really want to listen to what the different cabinets sound like. I'll do this in solo here, but at this point, when you start crafting the actual bass tone, there needs to be context. So at the very least, you need to have your drums playing. In the best case scenario, you would have drums, bass, and guitars all at the same time. Because part of mixing and creating tones, it's finding the window where each instrument can shine in its own particular spot. No different with bass. Yes, it's going to do the low end, but if you want to create a really nice distortion that blends well with the mix, makes the guitar sound more exciting, you have to create a tone that works with the guitars. It doesn't work against the guitars. So here's what everything sounds like. So 3 distinct different sounds. The best way to pick which one you should use, like I said, you should do it in the context with everything playing. And let me actually enable the processing here so we can hear the bass a bit more. I'll talk about this in a minute, but we want to hear what the bass is going to do. So let's listen. Okay, so it's all subjective. Whatever you thought sounded better in the mix for what's going on, that's the one you should pick. But you're always generally looking for the sound already that's cutting through the mix and sounds nice. All right. Alternatively, you have different microphones that you can pick here. It's the same logic. Play the track pick a different microphone, see which one just naturally pops out. That's usually a good indication that you should use that microphone. And then finally, you even have a vibe slider here where you can change the darkness and brightness of the tone without having to change anything else. This is a great feature to have because you might have a kick-ass bass tone, and then you're like, oh, if it could just be a tad darker. Well, instead of needing to load up an EQ and fumble with that, you can just use the vibe slider. So it's very useful, very powerful. Let's put that back there. Now that we have the cab sound that we like, we can start developing the tone a little bit more, in which case I would go to the pedal page. Now, there are two different distortion types. It's again, you should pick the distortion that you think sounds best for the song and then craft it from there. So let's turn on the Blackheath, see what it sounds like. Almost kind of old school sounding, a bit more mid-rangey. Let's do the Gamma Burst. There we go. Definitely more modern sounding, a bit more grind in the overall sound. So once you decide which distortion type and sound that you like, you can go down the weeds and you can dial it in even more. So you have these dials here, different types of overdrive, different sounds, and then you can dial it in. Remember to keep the drums and the guitars playing so that you're on track and you're comparing something in context. It's really never a good idea to try to do this in a vacuum without something else going on, because maybe the tone sounds good by itself, but once you put it in with a bunch of guitars, it doesn't work, okay? So you can save yourself a lot of trouble by just doing this with the drums and the guitars playing, all right? So that is exactly what I did here. I chose the Gamma Burst distortion because it has that top end grind that I wanted, and then I dialed in the knobs to where I think it sounded best. Now from there, I went to the actual amp head itself. I experimented with the tube on and off. So it was a little bit too, what's the word here? How can I explain this? It was a bit too unwieldy for me. And I thought, well, if I run this, I prefer the sound of what this is giving me. So I didn't really use the tube driver. I believe the setting that I'm using then is called like a solid state style drive. And obviously the tube drive is literally what it's called. It's with tubes. So you've got the FET volume here, which is the one that I'm using. Okay. Same rule applies. I can do this, hold Alt or Option on the Mac, click, and it goes back to the default setting. We have bass. Now, mids are very interesting because we have 4 different mid positions that we can adjust. I'm going for the pretty classic mid positioning, which seems to be around 400 or 500 hertz. You've got different positions, and they all produce different results. So experiment with the song playing to see which position works and what cuts through the mix better. I think obviously here is the level for the mid cut. Okay, so that's what that does. Treble. But I think the most important knob here is going to be this tilt EQ. It kind of goes back to, oh, my tone is really awesome. It just needs to be a little tiny bit brighter. Well, with the tilt EQ, you can do exactly what it says. You can tilt the mix to be a bit, or in this case, the bass guitar tone to just be brighter. Very powerful knob. It'll save your butt a lot because you'll have a really cool bass tone. If you realize, it needs to be just a hair brighter, cut through the mix a little bit more, you can use the tilt knob. So very powerful there. All right. And that's the tone stack. Pretty simple. All right. We already talked about the cab page. But at this point now, you can go to the effects page. So the effects page has an API style EQ. This is a sonic optimizer based on the very popular BBE sonic maximizer. We have an 1176 style compressor and an LA style compressor. So generally these 4 units are all you're going to really need to shape the character of your bass tone that much further. All right, so you can do your EQ moves up here. For example, let's go ahead and turn this in. So let's go. Right, just for the sake of argument, I'm not going to key this. We're just showing you that it's really nice. You can drive the signal a bit more. And then you can gain match. There you go. So that way you're not making the bass louder per se, you're just doing the EQ, all right? This goes into the maximizer thing here. That's more shaping in terms. You're not necessarily doing EQ here. You're just doing some extra sonic shaping, literally called the sonic optimizer for a reason. All right, it's just to eke out that last little bit of sound in the bass. And then finally we have the 76, which I didn't really end up using because with a bass sample library, the samples are very consistent. Generally, compression on a bass is meant to not equalize, but make a bass performance more consistent. So if you have a lot of peaks and valleys in your bass performance where it's really uneven, the dynamics are not consistent, a compressor can help squash that down to make it as consistent as possible, because we need a bass guitar that just sits and is pinned in a mix and is doing bass guitar things. And the 1176 is a fantastic option for compression. The LA2A is a great piggyback compressor that can catch errant peaks that are happening after the compression. You also squash things down a little bit, but it's really good at evening out bass signals even further. So between these 2 compressors, you can get a great, tight, consistent bass performance that stays pinned and locked in with the drums. So that's the top side of processing, otherwise known as the high frequencies. Remember, after we've done the split here, when we do this upper level of processing, we are working on the upper frequencies right here, okay? Now we have the lower frequencies. Now in this case, I would recommend to not turn on a cab. So leave the DI signal clean in the low end. That means this part right here. We're leaving this as a DI, so it's what is referred to as a clean signal. All right, we're not going to use the cab page. We are, however, going to use this module here. This is a specific module for the low end. Remember, I'm double clicking to enable it. And here we have 3 main options that we can consider. We have the sidechain option. In order to use sidechain, you need to enable sidechain in your DAW with the plugin. In Cubase's point of view here, all I got to do is click on the activate or deactivate sidechaining, and then I choose the kick track as my sidechain source. Now what this is going to do is the bass and the kick will work together in tandem, where the bass might get turned down when the kick hits, or you can make sure the kick is bumping above the bass, things like this. I would caution you that that real boom, 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 thumping type of pulsing sound, really popular in EDM, not really what you're going for when it comes to metal. You do not want a very audible whoomp, whoomp. Okay, it's not what you're looking for. However, a little bit of side chaining can help keep the bass tight and overall thicker. Second thing we have here is a compressor, which you definitely will want to do with the low end, because once again, you don't want the low end moving very much. You want it contained. And the compressor will help flatten out everything, keep it contained, so there's not too much dynamic performance going on. Again, if you have a real bass performance and the waveform just looks like this and it's super inconsistent with its playing, the compression of the low end will help lock everything together. Here are your compressor settings. And then we have placement. Where are we going to put the bass? Now, when it talks about placement, it's talking about in relationship to the fundamental note of the kick drum. Typically in metal mixes, especially if it's very high BPM with a lot of kick rolling going on, you would place the bass above the main kick drum fundamental, okay? And let the kick drum do all of the lows and sub lows. With a slow song like this, I'm actually going to put the bass in the below placement, so the bass guitar will also occupy the more sub low frequencies, which will be perfect because the song is slow. The kick isn't going all over the place, so we need a bass guitar there to handle a lot of those low end frequencies. From there, you can go to the processing page. This is the exact same processing plugin chain as we just saw in this page. It's exactly the same. And here now I am compressing the low end. And I'm doing that, like I say, to keep that performance pinned. I don't want any movement of the bass per se. The lowing, I should say. So if I solo this, you can hear every note has pretty much the same amount of bass information in it, and it's gonna make sure that the bass is always thick sounding in the mix. All right. So I have both of the compressors working here. I didn't do any EQ or anything with the optimizer. After that, you have the choice to add some harmonics to your bass. I have to not to do this, but to show you what it sounds like this. So there's two different types of harmonics that you can add. It's all going to be based on what your song is doing and how it sounds with the guitars, okay? I'm doing this in solo mode right now in the plugin so that you can actually hear what's happening to the low end. But this would all be done with the mix playing. So let's show you what I mean. Now I can already hear the bass perfectly. I don't need to, jack this up very much. I'm adding a lot more harmonic content to that low end, which is pushing frequencies up into the upper frequency range so that the bass can be more audible on a smaller speaker, for example. I opted not to use this, so it's disabled. The last thing to mention is these modules can be switched in a different order like this. Okay, this is very powerful, especially with post-processing, okay? If I had used the harmonic, or excuse me, the harmonics here, I might have switched this to make sure that the compression is also working and keeping into account the extra harmonic saturation that's going on. But I didn't use it, so it really didn't matter to me. From that point, the two splits come back into one, which is going to be the main output page, which looks like this. Now, the output page is exactly what you think it would be, but it has one very amazing feature that we just talked about earlier, which is this blending knob. Listen to this. Let's do this solo so you can actually hear. So I'm able to blend how much bass and how much treble I want as a whole in my bass tone. This is really cool. It's like the tilt EQ here. I can do some processing after the fact with the tone I already like, just to refine it a little tiny bit. I liked it at, what was it, 70-30? Let's do that. Cool. It's a great middle ground for the bass and treble sound. What I'm listening for is just to kind of make sure that the treble and the bass are pretty much in the same ballpark in terms of amplitude or how loud they are. And then that's what I go with. We have a parametric EQ here. If you double click on the line, you can add nodes. There's different types of EQ that you can do. Low cut, low shelf, high cut, and obviously a bell. You can change the bandwidth right here. It's a great, perfect parametric EQ. Again, great for doing everything in the plugin here so that you can save it as a preset and not have to worry about it. And then finally, we have the limiter here at the end, which is really just going to make sure that the bass is staying where it's supposed to stay, not clipping. You're not getting samples that are just barely going over 0.0, which then would be clipping the whole thing. So set the limiter to an amount that sounds good in the mix. But if you slam it too much, you're going to destroy the bass sound. All right, so let's just bring that back. There we go. That's a pretty good sound right there. So that's the process of how I built this bass tone. Just to recap here, the first thing you want to do is set up your DI. So do a crossover point where you have all of the low end and then all of the high end, and they're separated. From there, go ahead and enable your distortion plugins and your amp plugins, I meant pedals, and then choose the right cabinet that matches the song. Make sure your drums and guitars are playing so you can hear what cuts through and what sounds best. From there, you can actually shape the high-end frequency distortion tone between these pedals here and the amp head itself. One thing I should mention also is that this compression pedal will be very nice if you have an extremely dynamic and inconsistent picking pattern on a bass that you're working with. You can already compress the high-end signals so everything can be more uniform, more consistent. Go on down the line through there. You have your post-processing here leading into the output page. For the low end, it's all pretty much similar, except you have a compressor page and an effects page. And if you want, there's still the ability to choose a cabinet and then add more harmonics to the low end. Now that's about the plugin itself. What can you do after the fact once you have a bass sound that you like? You can do some very basic processing, which I'll show you right now. These are all stock Cubase plugins. You don't need anything else. And this is what I'm doing. I'm doing basic EQ here, a little bit more compression to keep the sustained notes fat and sounding louder for longer. And then this limiter here is doing nothing other than making sure the output is minus 0.1. So I have any extra peaks or clipping going on at all. Now for the EQ, it's standard EQ moves here. I am doing this woolly frequency here that sucks on all bass tones and metal. And then I'm controlling the boominess a little bit with this EQ move. Let me show you what that sounds like. Actually, I'll turn them off. See this one little move here, see how much it's helping keep the bass tone in check. All right, and then we can still do another cut here if we have a lot of low end energy. I felt like I needed to do that cut because it was getting a little boomy in the low end. Then we have the high end cut. Changing the tone a little bit, getting rid of kind of that sizzly aspect of it that I really wasn't enjoying. And yeah, just 4 basic EQ moves going into the compressor that I told you about. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, doing about 9 dB of compression. And that's all just to keep the bass up here in the face. And when the long notes are happening, it'll keep the long notes louder for longer, helping glue everything in the mix. And that is essentially the workflow for the Laney Digbeth. Fantastic plugin, quite simple to use. You're going to get a lot of great tones from it. And let's check out what this bass is doing in this song. Fantastic. The bass is thick, wide. It gives a little extra bit of grindiness, blends with the guitars fantastically, gets out of the way of the drums. Just a great, full sounding bass guitar. So that'll do it from there. If you have any questions, go ahead and hit up support. But the main thing is have fun and create some kick-ass killer bass tones. I'll see you soon.